Well, thank you so much. I first want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this amazing conference. I've had the opportunity to listen to some of the workshops and some of the talks, and it's just been really inspiring to see such powerful women have such important and key information to provide. So I'm just very excited to be here. I want to thank everybody that's also joining us and for giving yourself the time to continue to grow and learn. And it's just exciting to be here. So my name is Diana Albarran. Chicas, before I kind of get started into some of the key things I wanted to touch on, I wanted to provide a little bit of context around me, just who I am. I'm not sure that many of you know who I am, other than maybe having read my brief bio, but just wanted to say a few things. I am actually first generation, the first person in my family to have graduated from high school and the first one to go to college. I was very fortunate that although my parents did not have more than a third grade education, they realized the importance of education. And ever since we immigrated to the United States, that has been one of the big mantras for our family. We immigrated when I was 6. Actually, Spanish is my native language and English is my second language. And like many other stories that you hear from immigrant families that come from Mexico, my parents had to work various jobs and in pursuit of the American dream. They figured out clever ways, however, to support me as I continued to learn and go to school. One of the most vivid memories I have is of my mom cleaning houses in exchange of tutoring help for me. And that to me was the very beginning of just a cognizance around how to address kind of a problem in a very different way, right? My mother couldn't really help me with much of my homework, but she found a way for me to get help. And that started becoming something that I kind of learned and picked up as I progressed in school. I had the opportunity after a lot of hard work to actually go to college at MIT. I have a degree in electrical engineering, and actually after graduating from MIT with a degree in electrical engineering, I actually did not have a job. So I had to go back home and try to figure things out as to what I was going to do. And I'll weave part of this into the rest of some of the big learnings that I've had along the way. But I didn't have, I think, the connections or the network or the people awareness of how to make that happen. And during the time that I was in college, because I was doing a lot of pathfinding, really my goal was to graduate. And once I graduated, I didn't really have a clear vision of what I wanted to do afterwards. So after some hard work and trying to figure out what some of the potential next steps would be, I was fortunate enough to actually start working at Maxar Technologies. And I've actually been with Maxar for close to 14 years, which I know in the tech world and in Silicon Valley, that's a long time. But I've been very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to have a lot of different roles and have been involved in a lot of different things along the way. I've been an engineer, a design engineer. I've been an engineering manager. I've also have gone off and traveled around the world as a director in one of my roles. And now I'm actually more on the business development side and in technology development. So I've had an opportunity to do a lot of things, thankfully through the support of my organization, but also because I've figured out a couple of things along the way. And that's really the premise of my talk today. And I wanted to kind of provide a little bit of context and some of the things that I found as that became my path. So I'd mentioned that I had been a design engineer for about, or I started off as a design engineer, and I was in that role for about 5 or 6 years. And then I started noticing that people around me were getting either promoted or were getting other really super important projects. And I felt like I was not really getting any attention and I was not given those opportunities. And so I decided to have a conversation with my manager around it. And the feedback I got was actually, was very surprising because one of the first things he said was, actually, I thought you were just very happy doing what you're doing. Like, you've never mentioned that you've wanted to do something. You're doing a great job, and we just need to have you continue doing the same work. And in my mind, I just partly couldn't believe some of the feedback that he was providing. And that was a moment, a very pivotal moment, that I realized I need to do something differently, because I'm not I'm not getting not getting the type of work and the type of roles that I really want to aspire to, and I need to figure out how to break from this, right? And so that led me to this discovery of, what other things do I not know about how corporate America or works, or how the tech world works. And what I found was that there's all of these unwritten rules, right? That nobody really tells you, that nobody really sits down unless you have a network. And obviously, this is part of the purpose of this talk. That you don't really understand or know unless either you know somebody that's kind of been either in tech or in corporate, and you start figuring out and understanding, okay, what is it that they're doing? How are they doing these things? And how is that happening? So one of the things that I realized was that I needed to figure out, how do you get those important projects, and how do you do some of that? And what I realized was that I needed to really start talking about, the work that I was doing. I needed to start taking up space and talking about my accomplishments, and making it very clear about what it was that I was aspiring to. What are the things that I was actually looking for? Um, and I had to also overcome this cultural, this this cultural learning, as with an upbringing, as a Mexican upbringing, of being submissive, of being quiet, not speaking out of tone, just being very grateful for the opportunities that I was given. And there had to be this like mind shift and this awareness that I had to forget all of that if I was going to really succeed in either tech or in corporate. I needed to really talk about what I've accomplished, what things I've done, what my aspirations were, and in some cases even cause a little bit of that good trouble, right? That John Lewis kind of mentions. And by that I mean just challenging part of the status quo, right? You hear that a lot, but then you don't really understand what that means. Then a lot of that just really points back to, making it very clear about what it is that you want. And if organizationally or with your immediate managers, the feedback is like, well, that's not really possible, start figuring out ways that that could be possible, right? Looking at, well, maybe it's not possible here, but it might be possible in a different role or with another group, and trying to break that that block of, it's just not going to happen because I've been told that it could never happen, right? Like, we hear a lot in tech about challenge the status quo, and make sure that you're kind of pushing forward, which leads me to the other point around what I've realized is that a lot of things are negotiable, and this was also a very different thing for me to learn, in that I've thought for the longest term, or for the longest time, that, if somebody said something, that was kind of the end of it, right? And it took me a while to learn that, no, I can push back and I can ask for clarification, or I can say I respectfully disagree because of these and these reasons. And you get into this art of realizing that a lot of things are negotiable, just like your salary is negotiable, just like your project assignments are negotiable. There's a lot of those things that you can go and have different conversations, and steer them in the direction that are more desirable for you. And one of the best analogies that I found around explaining this whole premise around unwritten rules is that if you imagine, for example, that you're playing a board game, right? That we're all playing a board game, but 50% of the people get all the rules with the footnotes and a resource list for getting help. Then the other 25% only get like 60% of the rules, with only half of the footnotes and half of the resource list. And then the last 25% just get like the very basic rules. And so when you think about it in this perspective, right, in many instances, a lot of these unwritten rules and how things actually work, either in our respective companies or in tech or in corporate, we tend to only get the very basic rules of how to do your work and how to succeed and how to just continue grinding, right? But there's people around us that have had either resources or people that they can refer to that give them all that insight to all that other information that we know very little bit about. And so what this made me realize was that there is a slew of information of how things actually work, how promotions happen, how work assignments are defined, that are not conventional, that there's a lot of conversations behind closed doors. There's a lot of things that we just are not privy to, and that's partly a reflection of the networks that are not available to us and the networks that we don't know very much about. And I'm sure many of you know that women are over mentored, right, and under sponsored. And so part of getting to that resource list, if you go back to the analogy of the board games, is that that network that other people have, and that in many cases as women of color we don't, is that network that we need to figure out how to tap into so that we can be sponsored, so that behind those closed doors, people will advocate for us, people will realize the value that we bring, and so that we can continue to move and make progress in the work that we're doing. So it's really important that we find those key influencers in our respective industries and either read their articles or blogs, listen to their podcast, or if they're within your company, if there's specific people that you want to learn more from, figure out ways to connect with them. Sending an email or setting up a meeting, if possible, saying, I just really want to learn what you've done to get to where you are. If you can spare, 15 minutes of a coffee chat, or now everything is virtual, right? I just want to have a brief conversation of some of the key things that you wish you knew when you were starting your career, or now that I'm transitioning into this new role, I'd like to understand, how your transition worked and some of the things that you recommend that I do. And so it's important that we start learning how to appropriately leverage those networks and tap into those networks that are not normally available to us. And this is also the part where I start talking a little bit as well about the systemic structures that are really built against us, right? Because I think if we take a step back, many of us are part of organizations or companies that were not built for people like us in mind, right? They really do not have a good framework of how to ensure that everyone is on a level playing field, that corporations can't assume that everyone that comes in the door knows all of these unwritten rules and knows how to properly figure out, make themselves understood and heard and valued. So it becomes important for us to recognize that we're part of a system that's not built for us. It's not built for people like us in mind. But there's ways around that, right? But there are ways that we realize that we belong, we are capable, and we bring a lot of value in every role that we're in, because the simple act of us being part of these structures and these organizations is revolutionary, right? Because we've had to overcome, in some cases, many of us, so much to get to where we are, that is already that's already upending everything that can go back to just how recruiting happens, how networking and how closed door conversations make it harder for us to be part of some corporations and companies. The whole premise around some of the tech interviews with whiteboard interviews, right? And how you can go on Google and YouTube and just find these are the things to know how to combat some of these interviews or how to work through some of those processes. And all of that comes back to, again, all of these unwritten rules that many of us as women of color are not privy to in many cases. And that is really one of the key ways that I have found myself personally around combating imposter syndrome, right? Like grounding myself on the fact that corporations and organizations were not created with people like me in mind. They were not created with my unique perspective, with the life experiences that I have. They were not created with somebody that's had to unlearn a lot of the social learning that I've grown up with. That was not built for someone that doesn't have these networks available to them, in terms of I can just pick up the phone and call my dad or my uncle, who's a co-founder or founder, or has helped raise funds for a startup. I don't have access to any of that. And so just realizing that reminds me that I'm beating all of those odds, that I have overcome a lot of those already intrinsic things that are valued as part of tech in the corporate world. And the simple act of me being part of the conversation and doing the things that I'm doing are key and transformational. And so I just want to leave you with a few thoughts around just imposter syndrome, right? And that is, just remember that you are breaking ground and being part of the system that was not built for you. And ultimately, if you're not appreciated or valued where you are, I can guarantee you that there are places that do see your value, that do understand how much you can bring to the conversation, and that really, really at the end of the day can be really transformational for you and for what you want to aspire to do in the future. So I believe that is probably all the time that I have. So I just wanted to thank everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope that this has been helpful and informative, and that you have taken something from this conversation and learning a little bit about me and some of the things that I've learned and how I have figured out how to combat some of the things that I've had to work through myself.